Chapter 2, Organization and Preparation. I've seen many presenters fall short of their own expectations. They put in hours of preparation, but end up wondering why their presentations weren't as successful as they expected. Often, the answer is misplaced energy. They dedicate hours to designing PowerPoint or Keynote slides and focus too much on aesthetics, font sizes, graphics, etc. These aspects of presentations are important and necessary, but do not qualify as preparation. They're more technical. By preparation, I'm referring to strategic aspects, defining your objective, in case you're not clear, and determining the overall structure to your presentation. To prepare is to organize. Organization is essential for your ideas to flow in a seamless sequence that makes sense. But it doesn't have to be linear. It can, but it doesn't have to be. The good news is that there are many ways to create and deliver an effective presentation. Movies, songs, and books have structure. So should your presentation. The following sections of this guide discuss the above points in greater detail, focusing on the importance of strategic preparation. Before you get into the following chapters to better understand each element, you need to come up with a macro-level plan to organize your presentation and figure out the best plan of attack. All presentations consist of 3 basic pieces. I prefer to call them pieces as opposed to sections, because I think that works a little easier on the mind. A beginning, a middle, and an end is what's going to give you an effective presentation. In the beginning, we have our introduction, which actually can be 2 parts. There's the opening and the setup or preview. You don't always need to have an opening in your introduction, but you may choose to in order to entice your audience from the very start, assuming that you'll do an effective opening to really engage your listeners. Please refer to the chapter on presentation introductions for more. This is our setup, and there are many ways to set up a presentation. In the middle, we have the, quote, meat of our presentation, the details to whatever extent those may be. In the end, we have our conclusion, where we tie everything together, and sometimes also summarize depending on the nature of the presentation. And there are chapters throughout this book that are dedicated to each. So come up with a plan. I'll help you organize this and share some examples, but before we do so, here's a quick snapshot of how you should look at this. Your objective is your goal, your strategy is the plan, and the execution are the details. Let's break this out into further detail, and I'll help you organize what goes into each of these 3 key areas. As far as objective for chapters 3 through 5, you're going to basically be asking yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? Sell, tell, persuade, inspire, inform? Who is my audience? And what do I want to see happen as a result of this presentation specifically? In strategy, as far as chapters 6 through 8 specifically are concerned, you're going to be asking, from what perspective or angle overall should I come from, technical or pragmatic? What should be my overall tone or demeanor, funny, serious, sincere, clinical, etc.? And what does the audience know or think of me? And then as far as execution, chapters 9 through 14, you'll be asking yourself, how much detail should I have? Do my ideas flow from one to the next? Can listeners follow my thinking and logic? And finally, you want to anticipate audience questions and reactions. Let's make a cake. One of the most important questions you hopefully have on your mind is what is the appropriate balance between the actual content of your presentation and the overall appearance, or quote, package. In chapter 11, I discussed some tactical issues to be aware of, but that's the execution side of this book, and this is strategic. To help you with this, let's look at it in terms of making a cake. And for the purposes of this discussion, let's assume you know how, in general, to properly prepare and bake a cake. And let's assume you're hosting some type of dinner party at your home. You have 3 choices. 1. Focus the majority of your time making the cake really pretty with all types of beautiful icing, colors, and other aesthetics, but not much time on the cake itself before it goes in the oven. 2. Focus the majority of your time making the cake a really high quality, incredibly tasty cake, but not worrying all that much on the aesthetics. Maybe you have a very basic icing spread on, or maybe your cake is so moist and delicious you don't even bother with an icing or anything like that. And 3. Create a pretty good balance between the look and taste of the cake. So, what are the consequences of these options? In order of the above. 1. You have a cake that everyone wants a piece of, and they give you great compliments before they get served their slice. But once they bite into it, they're not really impressed. There's nothing wrong with the cake. It's not as though you confuse salt with sugar, etc. Remember, you know how to make a cake, but it's just, quote, okay. 2. You have a cake that doesn't necessarily captivate people, and you may not receive too many comments at first, yet at the same time, it doesn't turn them off. But once they bite into a piece, they will be so incredibly pleased. Maybe even more than pleased, perhaps delighted. And 3. Your aesthetics and the cake itself more or less matched what your guests were expecting. So what's my point, and how does this info help you with your presentation? Part of the answer rests upon your audience, which I devote time to in various areas of this book. But, and you probably know where I'm going with this, try to focus on options 2 and 3 above, not really option 1. It's not my objective to be judgmental here because I really want to help you. But I've seen far too many presentations focus on option 1, and not enough on options 2 and 3. There was so much time spent on beautiful layouts, colorways, fonts, etc., all fine things by the way. But the presenter either didn't have that much to say, or they simply didn't do a quality job delivering content. Everyone will be able to tell. If you go with option 1, again, when your guests are looking at the cake, they're excited, in the same way that your audience will most likely be excited with your title slide and maybe your first few slides. But once you get into the meat of the presentation, there's a good chance you've turned off your audience. In the same way that once your guests bite into their piece of cake, they're kind of not digging it anymore, and looking for a way to place it down on some table in your home and walk away from it. For general audiences, I'd say go with option 3. Create a balance between your aesthetics and content, or quote, meat of your presentation. For more specific or quote, serious audiences, I'd say lean a bit closer to option 2. Don't provide too much razzle-dazzle. Just have a clean presentation where content rules. Structuring your presentation. If you really think about it, while there is probably only one objective to each presentation, there are several ways, strategy, to do it. And once you've come up with at least more than one strategy, the ways you can execute also increase. One further thing, which I have a chapter devoted to, your audience will most likely also play a key role in your decision making. Think of having to clean a home, top to bottom. Let's say this is a single family house, 3 to 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, living room, dining room, kitchen, and a basement. If you need to clean the house because you're selling it, perhaps you'll want to hire a professional crew. If you're cleaning just for the sake of cleaning, perhaps you'll do it yourself. Here's an example. So, what is the objective? Cleaning the house. What is my strategy in order to achieve my objective? I can either hire someone, or I can clean it myself. And what would be the execution side? Well, if I hire someone, my execution would be to pay money and probably supervise. If I decide to clean it myself, my execution could be, for example, maybe I decide to do it by room, starting with the top floor. Maybe I decide to start it by room, but from the bottom floor. And lastly, maybe I take a different approach to executing, and maybe I do it by task. For example, dusting, I do the whole house, then vacuuming, then I do the toilets, etc. Now let's translate this into what it means for a presentation. Let's say that you'll be making a presentation on the difference between alternating current, AC, and direct current, DC, to a general audience, meaning non-technical people. Here are some ways in which you may organize your overall presentation. So option 1, okay, what is our objective? Educating on AC versus DC. And what might be our strategy? In this case, let's just say we have one strategy. We're mainly going to focus on the technicals, but keep it as basic as possible. And how might we execute that? Well, we can walk the audience through visuals of how power is delivered, AC versus DC. We can also provide applications for where AC and DC make sense, respectively. Now let's look at option 2. Again, the objective stays the same, educating on AC versus DC. But here's a different strategy this time with option 2. Don't focus on the technicals. And how may I execute? Well, maybe one way is share real-world examples why products have different voltage, adapters, etc. And a second way of executing might be offer a few key technicals on the two technologies and methods. And now let me just take an option 3 approach for you, which is sort of a little bit of a, different type of strategy. So again, same objective, educating on AC versus DC. This time, the strategy might be to share the story on rival inventors. And how might I execute that? A brief history on Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and their differences. Maybe another way would be to discuss safety, efficiency differences, and why certain products have one or the other. Let's say we now want to build out a presentation with slides, and we've landed on a strategy that doesn't focus on technical attributes, since again, we're presenting to a general audience. And since options 2 and 3 both don't focus on the technicals, we'll use a combination of both to execute. So let's construct this with a sample presentation coming from options 2 and 3. Of course, since presenting is both art as well as some science, there are so many ways to creatively execute your presentation. This is one of many examples, and it was done in this basic way to help illustrate the pedagogy, especially when you're looking at the slides in the printed version. So, introduction, slide 1, which is the beginning. I start with the Imagine Introduction technique, which is, again, chapter 10. Imagine. Imagine living in a world where there was no electricity, and all you had when the sun went down was candle power. Introduction, slide 2, beginning. Think of how different your life would be without the light bulb. But this isn't about the light bulb per se. It's more about imagining your life without electricity. Slide 3, beginning. More specifically, AC versus DC, alternating versus direct current. Slide 4, transition to middle. But to tell you about AC versus DC, I first need to tell you about two interesting people, pioneers of their time, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. They were like the Steve Jobs and Bill Gates of their time. Their stories are quite fascinating. The saga of AC-DC was riddled with passion, partnership, politics, scandal, and eventual loathing for each other. I think the only thing missing from this tale was sex. Slide 5, middle. The difference between AC and DC, for all of us non-technical people, myself included, think of it like these illustrations. DC, or direct current, flows in a straight line. AC, or alternating current, has an ebb and flow pattern. Slide 6, middle. In DC, you're carrying electricity essentially in a straight line, with generators to the destination. In AC, you're doing something similar, but you'll notice with the areas circled, there are transformers. Smaller amounts of electricity are needed from the source and can be passed through and then converted. In both cases, the total electrical power is the same. Slide 7, middle. But as mentioned, the story of AC and DC is like a classic soap opera. Edison took every opportunity he could to try and undermine Tesla's AC model. Wanting to demonstrate how AC was far more unsafe to DC, Edison went so far and took advantage of the electrocution of Topsy the elephant, claiming that the suffering of this popular circus elephant was due to AC. Slide 8, middle. But AC is not less safe than DC, and in many cases safer than DC, since it's not direct current at the required voltage. While landlines are going away as time goes on, the reason why you don't get electrocuted when picking up a landline telephone during lightning and an electrical storm is due to AC. And I think we'd all agree, this is a good thing. Slide 9, middle. However, DC makes a lot of sense for a variety of applications when you don't need electricity traveling for long distances. Battery chargers are just one of many examples. Slide 10, transition to end. These two men, once friends and partners and eventually bitter foes, were both brilliant for their contributions and wound up sharing the Nobel Prize. Slide 11, end. Truth be told, while all passionate people driven to success by personal ambition and a desire to change the world may have conflicting worldviews, the world would not be the same if it were not for the important contributions of both Edison and Tesla. And AC and DC power, as we know it, may not have existed. So, as I mentioned, there are many ways to put a presentation together, and this is just one small example. This should give you an indication of how to generally organize and structure your presentation.